Değerli katılımcılar, hepinizi sevgi ve saygıyla selamlıyorum.
Dear participants, we would like to welcome you to our session,
Bilim Tarihi ve Sanat
which
Sempozyumu.
is a part of our symposium. Welcome once again, and thank you very much for being with us. This panel will be dedicated to human
Bu panelde
beings that gave way to modernity, and we are going to listen to three esteemed speakers. We have actually one of our professors could not make it, Professor Gündoğan, due to his hectic schedule. So
İbrahim Kaya hocalarımız
Professor Cemal Güzel and İbrahim Kaya will be joining us today.
ilk sözü Hacettepe
Now,
Üniversitesi Felsefe Bölümünden Profesör Doktor
let me give the floor to Professor Güzel Hoca from Hacettepe
Teşekkür
University.
ederim Sayın Başkan. Değerli meslektaşlarım, değerli
Thank you very
katılımcılar,
much.
sevgili
Dear participants,
öncelikle
dear students,
selamlıyorum.
first of all, let me greet you all with my deepest
Bu
regards.
yapacağım kısa konuşmada şöyle bir plan izleyeyim diye düşündüm.
Here's the plan for this speech.
Ayırmak gerekiyor belki. Bu
Let us perhaps differentiate between two things,
bir tutum
the
adlandıran
modern of an
ayıracağım.
era and modern of an attitude. A distinction between this is required because modernity as an attitude should be seen as an attitude. Otherwise, postmodernity will not be possible if we solely focus on the modern era, because
Aslında bu
postmodernism, in a way, is an objection to the attitude necessitated by modernity. Otherwise, it is not possible. The end of the end, in a way, is self-contradictory in terms of understanding. But if we see modernity as an attitude, as an intellectual attitude, only then can we truly understand the objection to this attitude, whether it's substantiated or not, whether you agree with it or not. That's how you can truly understand postmodernity, I believe. And there, from an etymological point of view, modernity comes from modus, which means style. It is derived from the word modernus, and it means the latest way of doing something, moderntus. And actually, everyone at every age, as they start thinking differently from the masters, they label what they do as nos modernus, us moderns. And in the 12th century, we see this in the articles of Bacon, us moderns. That's how he uses the term in his articles. And then Francis Bacon, his namesake, also talks about this rupture. He's one of the leading thinkers to talk about that. And and here, what needs to be added is this. When we start as us moderns, well, modern of a given era will become outdated in the future. Francis Bacon, he is the founding father or modernity who said that science and observation are important. This is what made him modern. But when we look at mathematicized sciences of today, we realize that he is outdated and not modern. So this is a relativity that needs to be factored in when we talk about modernity, when we talk about modern ages or the modern order. We should always be careful about that relativity. And also implicitly, there is something that we say every time we utter the word modern. One of the connotations is the fact that what is modern is good. This is like a natural extension, which is also debatable whether what is modern is better than what has come before. And also, one more thing that has got to be emphasized is this. Modernus in the 4th century Rome, Christianity wanted to differentiate itself from the pagan times, and that's why they used this label in a way. So, and in order to also differentiate the scholastic school of thought with Bacon, a new modern era was ushered in. So in a way or modern order, what we call by modern order um, is contrarianism against Aristoteles, I believe, because with Bacon and a process was initiated, continued with Descartes. The modern thought is against the scholastic school of thought, and what we understand from scholastic is Aristoteles, um, which is beset by difficulties of the Middle Age. And there's one thing that has got to be emphasized as a period. If we start talking about modern, what is modern? Um, we see that delineating history is easier said than done. Alexander Koren said, from C to tree, there is no jump, immediate jump. When you start looking at things from a closer angle, you see that there are no direct delineations. There's always permeability between the lines. Descartes is the founding father of modern philosophy, but he used Middle Age concepts, and Francis Bacon was also influenced by philosophers that came before him, and that's only natural. So we cannot pigeonhole philosophers. It's always more like a progression, um, and um, you know, the lines are always getting more and more ambiguous when you take a closer look. Now, this was my introduction, and just to recap what I have said in 3 sentences: modern thought, when we look at the history of philosophy, you know, differentiating between modernity and scholastic thought is a prominent distinction. Modernity as an attitude, I will get to what that attitude is. And when we do that, postmodernity becomes an intelligible concept, and it can be seen as an objection to an attitude. Otherwise, as a name, it is not even possible. If modernity means, you know, the latest way of doing things, then postmodernity cannot be possible. But it's more like an objection. Um, the first thing that comes to mind is knowledge and science, and this is what I'm going to be focusing on. I have a few things about that, and also in political order, social order. What did modern thought bring to our lives? I will also focus on that. Now, we've been talking about Bacon repeatedly, um, and it's for a reason. Um, when you look at the thinkers of that age, um, when you look at that modern era, reforms, Renaissance, the end of the Middle Ages, there's always an emphasis on the new, a new logic, a new methodology should be postulated, a new way of doing research or engaging in scientific endeavors. Uh, Hobbes bases his thoughts on Bacon, and he put forth a new political language. Galileo had the claim to put forth a new understanding of physics. Bacon, a new methodology. Descartes, a new method, a new way of doing things. And this emphasis on new with modernity in the 17th century was such an integral force. And when you look at utopias, you also see reflections of that. And they shunned what was old, and they wanted to come up with new ways of doing things. observation and experiment. So the emphasis for the new era was experimentation and observation based on these two and also based on logic. So it was about bringing in new concepts such as logic. Logic comes to the foreground, and then you have experimentation and observation. This is how you find knowledge. And Bacon also said, what is the basis of science in the 20th century? Let's remember what he said, controlling the nature or giving in to nature to accomplish that. And this also tells us about the modern attitude, the intricacy or the tension between the relationship between the nature and the humankind. Nature is seen as something that is to be tamed from that point onwards, um, not something within which we live in peace, but something that we need to tame in or reign over. And for that, we need to give in by observation and experimentation. And computation, the importance of mathematics. What does this tell us? If we tame nature, again, one of the main tenets of contemporary science, making predictions. So all in all, this is what this school of thought tells us: experimentation, observation, and employing logic when we do things, and also the upper hand that observation and experimentation will sort of grant us. Now, Bacon, in the field of nature, based his thoughts on experimentation and observation and logic. With Hobbes, um, this found a reflection in the realm of politics, and through experimentation and observation in the social realm, by looking at what happened in the past or by examining the social order that prevails currently, um, this has an implication politically, and it's all about finding principles to govern that political system. So with Hobbes at that time, um, also we see an emphasis on the nature and social contract theory was put forward, which was later taken up by Rousseau. In Aristoteles, you also have that. So in a way, people coming together, forming a social contract is what they started to focus on. So this social order, um, we live in a society as people living in the society. Um, it's all about how to make sense of things. In the pre-modern times or in the old ages, um, there were different components that made up the social order. And now let's try and understand this through humans. And when we do that, here's the situation that we find. Up until that point, justice and happiness, or to live in peace in a fair society, and you needed a utopia-like state, um, and you would have peace and justice only in the heavens. But with modern thoughts, people started to discuss how to make sure that justice and happiness prevails here on earth, and something that we need to be in pursuit of. And this was the clear distinction. Now, one more thing that was emphasized at the time is as follows. Of course, this wasn't new, but the new era focused on this natural law, this concept of natural law, and this was an important development as well. Natural law is something that even God cannot intervene. So the concept of natural law also became a very important topic.
So in natural law, there is no such thing. There are things that God cannot interfere with. So the law in this style will be something implementable. And on the other hand, in modern thought, human beings will be individuals. What type of individuals? Individuals not consisting of assignments, but rather having rights. And if you add something else next to the intellect, yes, human beings are intellectual, but they have passions at the same time. And because of this, they are in conflict with the society. What type of a society is this? It is no longer a natural being, and social contact theorists talk about an artificial institution, because there is will from the side of the individuals to construct it. And in the competition, individuals will be competing and contradicting with each other, and there will be a conflict between the individual and the society, and the concept of right arises from this conflict. One more thing, when we consider the harmony in this society, this is not something made possible by a heavenly foresight. With the scientific idea, laws and regulations are laid out for a harmonious society. With modern thought, one of the novelties brought to the political arena is that the acceptance of the equality of all the individuals living in the society. All the individuals are accepted as equals, and virtue or wisdom are respected, and the best social design is no longer asked for. However, a more regular design is sought for. Another concept in the formation of the social field is the concept of consent. As the individuals have their consent, they agree to be members of this societal order. Economically, there will be novelties, but I won't be touching upon these. If I am to limit my remarks with a couple of sentences, in this modern era, in this modern style, we have a transformation from agriculture to an industrial society, and there is an industrial reform, and the efforts of colonialization increase as a result of this modern order. And these are the economical results of the process. What we call modernity, it brings together a progressive thought process, and the society is in a continuous struggle of being. I would end by saying that modernity is seen as something positive. However, postmodernity is an attitude which includes a criticism to the process and makes the effort to make itself right. And urbanization, scientific success, comfort made possible by technology were the factors that defined modernity. But opposite to these positivities, we have disadvantages brought forward by technology, human beings being alienated to certain values, and the individual, societal relationships, and nature. There are efforts to regulate these in detail. The individual, the society, and the nature are being regulated. And postmodernity is an objection to this attitude, and it will be criticizing the intellect. And this criticism will be in line with a political attitude, and by adding a Western next to this effort, the process will evolve. I will not be getting into the debate about postmodernity, but the individual, the society, and the nature as concerns its regulation, there is a disadvantage and negativity, but the solutions that are proposed do not seem to be right, because the criticism takes us to another point, and those who work in the field of science talk about this. And when we talk about science, if we understand it as Western science, then we are being sent from one side to the other. And the solutions or the thoughts that are considered as solutions do not seem to be that appropriate. What is a human being? What is a human being is a question that is asked by modernity. Modernity creates all of us. When you look at the mirror, this is what is created by modernity. Mr. Chairperson, it has been 20 minutes. Thank you very much for listening. If there are questions, I will be more than happy to answer them. Thank you very much for listening. I thank you, Cemal. First of all, we would like to thank Professor Dr. Güzel for his presentation. And modern, he explained as a passion and a period. Then he said that the borders between the periods are rather vague. And then he said, if modernity is an attitude, then postmodernity and postmodern discourse would have a meaning as a counter argument, he said. And meanwhile, human beings are individuals. They do not only have assignments or obligations, but also rights, he said. And he explained this in detail. Therefore, he talked about the concept of consent, which is very important. And at the same time, with modernity comes a concept of development, advancement, he said. Postmodern attitude, or the approach we call as postmodern, identifies certain problems related to modernity. However, the solutions it proposes are not that relevant at the point of criticizing intellectual thought, this will bring us to another dimension, which makes everything possible. As has been said, if you like principles, although I do not believe in them, I can provide you with principles. In the epistemology of postmodernism, we will see a similar approach. It can be this or that. And the point we are brought to is not something positive. Thank you very much, Professor. The questions will be answered after the second presentation. So now I would like to invite our esteemed Professor İbrahim Kaya from 9 Eylül University, Department of Sociology. Yes, Professor, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say hello to everyone. Before everything, regarding the topic of your panel, I would like to say a couple of things. Human beings created by modernity. That expression in the first instance might result in an erroneous perception, I think. And it might be understood as if modernity has created the human being. Maybe at the first instance, what we call as a human being, in the process, we have given more credit than deserved to modernity. Yet, human beings, as we know, have existed for the last 2 million years, which means way before the start of modernity. Of course, the neurological assets that we have as of today are as a result of a leap that has occurred nearly 50,000 years ago. And all the progresses afterwards are results of biological evolution, which is based on a neurological development and neurological revolution. Thus, the expression human beings created by modernity is not necessarily correct. And we might as well claim that modernity is created by human beings. The reason why I made an introduction like this is as follows. The story of human beings until modernity is a story of progress. After human beings accepted this planet Earth as their feeding ground, they have written a marvelous history. And at the center of this story, we see advancement, we see progress. In this splendid story of human beings, modernity would occupy a very limited place. Of course, as has been stated in the topic of the panel, this is not what we necessarily understand from the expression, yet there might be such a concern. That is why I found it relevant to bring forward an explanation. Human beings existed way before the beginning of modernity, and their existence cannot be limited to modernity. This marvelous history is something that is always progressive. I'm not talking about this as something linear. However, when we think about this as a concept, this can be regarded as a history of progress. So rather than using the concept of modernity, human beings created by modernity, we should stick with the expression that modernity created by human beings. Human beings came up with such an impressive history that they came up with the age of modernity, which had significant progresses inside it. Of course, historically, human beings' history can be taken back for years. Agricultural revolution, the construction of cities, the foundation of states, and similar progresses have all taken place, and these need to be regarded as things that are magnificent. So the history of human beings in this world is magnificent in itself, and it cannot be limited to modernity, and it cannot be only linked to modernity as a concept. Yet there needs to be a question. So if we define modernity as an era that is separate from the others, and if we need to talk about a principle that makes it distinct, what should this principle be? So if we leave modernity outside of this equation, maybe the events that have taken place would not be making us that curious. And we have difficulties in comprehending the details. When we look at the 19th century, for example, the world's population, I believe, is around 600 millions. Only a century later, in the 20th century, it is close to 5 billion individuals. And this is not a progress that is easily comprehensible. That is why modernity shows a different advancement compared to previous ages. And we have to ask the question of what makes modernity different. If we see modernity as an equal progress, then we might not be able to comprehend the history before modernity. We might lack the skills thereof. And during modernity, we are talking about a notion specific to human beings that is transforming and progressive. So some might claim that I am having a species-specific perspective. However, the world is rather reshaped and reconstructed by human beings. So among living things, human beings are unique in that regard. And the potential to be progressive makes the difference. Its ability to comprehend has a central role. Human life is constructed upon the idea of solving problems. In order to solve a problem, you have to first comprehend a problem. And for the solution, there might be interventions necessary. So the more you understand the problem, the better you bring forward solutions by changing the existing condition. Concerning the interventions of the human beings, these resulted in changes which led to the growth of human beings as a society or as a civilization, and it got more complex. Human beings grow they get more complex. As a result of progress, they created more complex structures, and at the end, they tried to search for an order. Because for progress, they needed to focus on each and every problem separately, but from a general perspective, there is a problem of order created by such changes. Therefore, progress necessitated understanding, understanding required intervention, and intervention resulted in change, and change made things more complex, necessitating a search for an order. In this process of progress, a new principle was brought forward, and during modernity, there was the concept of autonomy. There was the ideal of autonomy, rather, and autonomy is what makes modernity modernity. And this principle or an ideal of autonomy is very valuable. And at the age of incredible progress, we see that the principles are very valuable.
Now, after the agricultural revolution, big transformations took place. Human beings would always intervene with the nature. But after the agricultural revolution, humans started to change the environment and turn it to their advantage fully. And of course, in the modern era, this became much more radical. Rather than trying to intervene, intervening to solve problems and instigating change, and this giving way to progression or progress became a part of our lives. But what radicalized this transformation was modernity itself, and the reason for that is the principle of autonomy, which was added to this process by modernity. There are three, regarding autonomy, there are three main attitudes, and the first of this is the individual's autonomy. So what differentiates a modern society from others is actually as follows. The modern society within its ranks has autonomous individuals. And in traditional societies, that is not so possible. Of course, there might be exceptions, but by and large, autonomy of the individual is only possible in modern societies. So individual autonomy in terms of progress for modernity is the very first important component. At the same time, from political modernity, cultural modernity, we can talk about these concepts, and we can do that by putting into practice this concept of individual autonomy. Political modernity, and we call this democracy, or we may call this democracy, or economic modernity, industrialization mostly, and cultural modernity. And by and large, this is based on secularism. And all of these actually have a logic of their own. And as such, they can self-regulate. This belief is what sees modernity is an age of dizzying moments of progress. So modernity is a matter of progress, but historically, history of the humankind has always been history of progress. But what makes modernity different is this ideal, this concept of autonomy, starting with 17th century, a scientific revolution, and enlightenment, secularism, 18th century developments such as the French Revolution, independence of the US in 18th century. You have in the UK economic economic developments such as the Industrial Revolution that gave way to the modern society, and this modern society differs by and large from other societies because of the fact that it has individuals. Of course, secularism, industrialization, democratization are the main dynamics behind the individual, the autonomous individual. So modern society, by and large, from an ontological point of view, is a society where the individual has a higher priority than collectivism. Democratization, economic modernity, industrialization, cultural modernity, secularism, these three processes are all intertwined. And progress is thus achieved, and in the that's how we came to the mid 20th century and reached the modern society. So every field will have its own logic. Obviously, economic, political, cultural, all these realms will have their own logic, or this idea that requires that, and the idea that the individual should be autonomous are the basic tenets of the modern society, and that's what makes it different from all the other societies in the past. And of course, right now, this process can be assessed as follows. By and large, this process for quite some time has also embodied certain deviations, and in my talk, I wanted to emphasize these deviations. So in a way, progress in the story of our magnificent process, there are deviations, and also some basic deviations from the story of modernity, and these deviations can be grouped under a few headings, I believe. And the first is the relationship between democracy versus capitalism after the demise of the Soviet socialism, and especially in the mid European societies, how they embraced capitalism quite rapidly, and capitalism and democracy were seen as one and the same by them. So in a way, the basis of modernity, or bearing in mind the basis of modernity, of course, democracy, capitalism, and these were seen as indispensable, democracy and capitalism. And rather than being autonomous fields, people felt that capitalism, it was as if capitalism helped democracy thrive. In the absence of capitalism, you cannot have democracy, or capitalism creates democracy. So this thought became dominant after the 80s, but especially in the last 10 years, capitalism and democracy, the relationship between these became asymmetrical, and this asymmetry is to the advantage of capitalism. So the individual, the relationship between the individual and the society can be dissected from this point of view. Between democracy and capitalism, there's an asymmetric relationship, which is to the advantage of capitalism, and this deviates us from this great story. But it's not the only deviation, as far as I'm concerned. The conceited individual is on the foreground, and the society, compared to the individual, is relegated to the second status, or to the second place. For instance, freedom, of course, is one of the indispensable tenets of the modernity project, the freedom of the individual. However, over time, we also see that because of the asymmetry that we've talked about, individual freedoms, it's as if it trumps all the other social values, such as values such as solidarity are pushed aside. And again, we see some serious deviations here in the relationship between the society and the individuals. It's as if conceited individuals are much more prioritized, even above and beyond the society. And sociologically, can we really call this a society is rather doubtful. In order to live together as a society, there must be certain shared values, such as, well, today we're talking about coronavirus. We're going through this pandemic, and we desperately need solidarity, and that's something that we came to realize. But for quite some time, solidarity was shunned, and it was never promoted as a social value, as a glue that would bring us together. And because of that reason, as a society, whether we can live as a society or not, is an important question that needs to be tackled. At this point, cultural modernity um, has also exhibited certain restrictions, and of course, this has to do with the relationship between democracy and capitalism, the asymmetry there, and the prioritization of the conceited individual in today's societies. In a way, culture in the cultural field, triumph of the average or the mediocre is the process that we're going through, I would think. And the main issue here is the forming of sort of cliques within the society, and a member of every clique um, um, sort of accepts whatever their political representatives say or do. If another political party does the same, they would strongly oppose it. So, in a way, we are becoming more and more like the Middle Ages in this particular manifestation of deviation. On cultural modernity, economic and political tensions are also quite plentiful, and the mediocrity is getting more and more triumphant. And that's why we find ourselves in this age of post-truth that we call post-truth. Um, so this is quite ominous. The lines between facts and lies are blurred, and people are deeply polarized. And objective realism is not something that people pay heed to, um, and it sadly doesn't carry much weight. And as a result, we have this problem of coexistence as a society, and also these regarding these deviations. Of course, a lot can be said, but our time is limited. Um, Ignoring biological reality is also another development, and social sciences against scientific foundation, or against science, against scientific framework, we are under attack. And everything is seen as a construct, but there are main disciplines like biology and neurology, and we shouldn't adopt a negative stance against them, because we want to explain the human condition. We cannot shun biology and neurology. That is not something that we should be happy with, and this is one of the most important impasses of our time. In social sciences, I believe we need to reconcile this gap, and we need to take biology and neurology much more seriously, and forge better ties with them and learn from them. Otherwise, we will not be able to truly understand the human condition. Otherwise, we will not be able to explain the human condition if we see it merely as a construct. So, from that point of view, modernity, from the point of view of progress, it is a radical step. It created its own era, but recently, because of in the project of modernity and in general, um, um, from the story of humankind, we have seen some deviations. relationship between democracy and capitalism, individual and society, sciences, social sciences, asymmetry in all of these, and the triumph of mediocrity as a result, which is a serious problem that needs to be grappled with. I think my time is up, Mr. Chair. You have two more minutes if you have more to say. Yes, modernity, uh, the story of humankind or human progress cannot be simplified down to modernity. But what makes it extraordinary is a foundation, of the principle of autonomy, and this ideal of autonomy, or this principle of autonomy, in a way, is problematic in this age that we're living in. Um, and that's because of the asymmetric relationship between capitalism and democracy, and the relationship between individual and society. The conceited individual is on the foreground and is prioritized above all, and at the same time, social sciences are shunning positive sciences. We need to reconcile this gap. We shouldn't move away from scientific foundations and rub shoulders more with medical disciplines. That's what I wanted to say as my final remarks. That's all from my side. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Professor. Especially your thoughts on progress, modernity were quite interesting. And you also said that progress does not exclusively belong to modernity, that we've had this magnificent story as humankind. But if I'm not mistaken, you also say that you talked about dizzying developments, and because of the fact that they took place in the modern times, we tend to focus more on the modern times, but we have this magnificent story as human beings in terms of progress, and that has been going on since time immemorial. But also, one thing was striking for me, what in terms of what makes progress in modernity different. You talked about the principle of autonomy, the autonomy of the individual, culturally, politically, and economically as well. You talked about the importance of these in the world that we are living in currently. Thank you very much for your talk, Professor. Now, going back to the title of our panel, uh, um, let me say a few words. Now, your criticism is substantiated. It's as if the modern era created the human kind, or we became humans at this age. Some people might think, but actually, in order to tell the story of the modern human, we wanted to emphasize that point. And human that created modernity, or the human that modernity created. Yes, sorry. Um, I I thought maybe some people could perceive it that way. I didn't mean to be criticizing your title. No, no, no, that's fine. Classic, scholastic, and modern. These three concepts um, um, are quite widespread in the history of philosophy and science. These conceptualizations throughout the history of human mind questioned transformation, and they were used as watershed moments. And these classifications um, are not specific to certain time periods. In a way, all societies concurrently, for instance, scholastic, do not have concurrently scholastic or modern um, um, features. We cannot say that all societies are modern today, despite the fact that we're living in the modern era, because the history of humanity tells us that men and women living in a given period of time, from a psychological point of view, are not all contemporaries or intellectual contemporaries. we cannot say that Renaissance took place all around the world at the same time. And actually, in the Middle Ages, I mean, there are some societies that still live in Middle Ages or behind Middle Ages. So progress is not concurrent, is not simultaneous all across the world. Well, within this perspective, when we assess this, we say that Renaissance, Enlightenment, and then you have the modern periods. These three stages do not hold true for the entire planet. I think that is something that needs to be emphasized. And one more thing that needs to be stated is that basic values of modernity and patterns of behavior, in essence, are steeped in Renaissance, and with Enlightenment, the basic form was given to these. And also, it is quite evident that every school of thought, has its own proponents and opponents and detractors, and these discussions are very much still underway. We talked about post-modernism, for instance, and it is such a debate. And we see other criticisms coming from other corners as well.
There is the claim that there is going back to Renaissance in the literature. And I don't think this is quite right. If there is a going back to old ages, maybe it is related to still giving importance to the values of those ages, because Renaissance can be defined as the birth of an age which could never be dreamed about by human beings. And when we think about which approach is to be taken seriously, we see that there is no need to make a selection, because the question of which approach is right, I don't think this is useful. Maybe we can suggest a third approach, saying that the real meaning of Renaissance is education, because rebirth might demonstrate itself in the field of education. When individuals are equipped with new ideas and new emotions, they might as well renew educational methods. If new ideas are not included in the educational system, this will not lead to success, we might say. From this perspective, human mind requires correct information, and for this, a successful education is necessary. Despite the process is multi-vocal, it is possible to make such a definition. Before anything, Renaissance is the replacement of the chorus of Middle Ages with the singularity of the individual. By working, by making an effort, the individual realized his ability to change the world, and she became competent. And this feeling of competence, combined with the universe being eternal, gave strength to the process. Cemal, Güzel made references to Francis Bacon. There was the assumption that the nature had mathematical qualities, and this is at the same time a time period where there was common sense in the process. Our historical presumptions are based on certain ideas, and in front of us there are new horizons. the field of action has its limits. The strength of the horizons of expectations is in their accessibility, and it has borders within the confines of human future. If this identification is not realistic, then you have to surrender to unrealistic thoughts. And those who oppose to the process have a similar problem. The individual who needs to construct the future has to be free, and freedom is a strength. And the hypothesis that modernism and modernity ended becomes paradoxical. Modernity is an abundance of novelty, which seems difficult to consume. Although this is the case, why do some individuals are so enthusiastic about seeing the end of modernity? In other words, despite the meaning is debatable, we are talking about postmodern after modernity. And I think that it is important to analyze these problems. Naming postmodern brings together questioning modern. In fact, the concepts have striking strengths, and I believe these concepts are rather developed by Western thinkers. Legality is a concept that is important at the age of modernity, and the accumulated experience is a result of experimentation. And there is the effort of cultural logic that is being developed. And in the free market, we build the foundations of a weird economic structure. The socialism has already collapsed, and welfare state notion has lost its reputation. So the solution is to provide the foundation for a new cultural order, producing with a flexible style and saying the societies that you do not have to build factories, we will produce at a lesser value and sell it to you. You should rather shift to a service society is dictated to some societies. In the industrial society, we see that there is production. However, here we have service industry growing, and those who do not produce consume more, which is being targeted. And media is an important figure for the service industry, and it has to become part of the capitalist system. So to what extent these exceed the expectations that it is possible to talk about post-modernity? So if we think that modernity has its shortcomings, to what extent postmodernity answers the questions that are left out? And I think there is no success in postmodernity either. I think what is confusing is that modernity is used to encompass many different things, and the period and the attitude approached by Professor Güzel covers some of these aspects. Industrialization and technical advancements are usually emphasized when definitions of modernity are made, whereas some others point to popular culture. The discussions on modernity are based on shadow concepts, resulting in unfounded expectations. However, modern is in itself a radical change, a world order which is not in correlation with the previous one. And it is about living in a revolutionary world scene. And after each revolution, it is expected that the scene will change. And it is not anything larger than changing the whole scene. What changed with modernity? First of all, as I said, human beings were singing like a chorus before modernity, but they started to have singular voices afterwards, both in the fields of art, science, and philosophy. And individuals understood that the scene and the world they are members of has changed, and they realized that they have the consciousness to be an individual. And Descartes talks about the existence, the essence, and it underlines the importance attached to the intellect. And there is the prioritization of the intellect. And there is also the distinction between the private space and public space. In addition to these gains, I am not even talking about the advancements in the field of science. The new, therefore modern, is individualistic, intellectual, orderly, and as a result of thinking, and it's conceptual, aims at progress, and it represents such a mentality. In other words, skills, competencies that are lost in the context of a choir are being emphasized, and creative individuals are seen by the society as brighter individuals. Neither Copernic, nor Kepler, nor Galilei, or Da Vinci could have appeared if this hadn't been the case, because during the Middle Ages, the consciousness was under a curtain. It was a world of half reality, half imagination. There wasn't the guidance of science. The human beings were not seeing themselves as individuals. And the qualities we have listed so far did not remain the same during the course of modernity. And progressive changes occurred in the concepts and principles that defined modernity. And it is obvious that some of these are still relevant, and modernity continues at full pace, and societies that have not realized this completely are taking the necessary steps forward. So how can we surmount something that is ongoing? We might have changes in practical and theoretical dimensions. However, we might not call it an obstacle. Is it possible that we have already surmounted it? then if this is the case, what replaced the already existing principles? If the process is successful, then why do we advocate for post-modernity? The intention might be not to go to the conclusion as well. I would like to make references to Lyotard at this point. In his work called Postmodern State, there are sincere opinions that are being shared. He thinks that this is not a natural development like the clash of civilizations. This is a discourse that has been commissioned. And we see that the report is based on knowledge. And what is asked from him is, in fact, a report that is based on knowledge. Thus, modernity and postmodernity stems from a discussion based on knowledge. And it won't change as long as the principles and conditions are there. And what is the problem then? In developed societies, there are deviations from life that are information centered, and these are regarded as threats and seen as problems for civilizations. That's why causalities are investigated. The message is clear. If we are getting away from an information-focused life, then we have to come up with solutions. So the efforts of the societies who haven't been modern to be post-modern will be in vain. And these do not seem or sound meaningful. It is possible to have architectural structures that seem marvelous, and we can as well compose very successful pieces of music. And if you are to build a skyscraper, you definitely use modern knowledge, and different aesthetics and different ethical structures can be formed by the knowledge of the modern, which does not necessarily mean objecting to modernity. So modernity is also an ism at the same time. Thank you very much, everyone. That was my comments. There are some questions here which I would like to share with you. First of all, there is a question to our Professor İbrahim Kaya. It reads, at the point we are today, we have the global climate crisis and irreversible environmental disasters, inequalities, and hunger. To what extent we can claim that these are wonderful processes in the advancement of the humankind after the agricultural revolution? Where does the right to use the nature and the other beings than itself come from? So regarding the process of progress, I talked about certain hesitations, certain concerns, and certain questioning. And because some might think that it will be difficult to talk about this in other terms, because human beings have been living in this world for 2 million years, and they have gone beyond its own limits. And there are harms that have been given to the environment, we definitely need to see this. As the human species, it is not compulsory to deem itself superior. However, there is a very rich historical experience which makes human beings unique, whether we are critical of the process or not. And we have to definitely accept the fact that this history is important. There is definitely societal inequalities and damage to the nature. We should, of course, criticize this. But what I wanted to highlight is that human beings can create civilizations and can construct cultures. And this progressive being is unique, and this needs to be emphasized. Saying this or claiming this does not mean that I do not agree with the damage dimension of things. But human beings have a magnificent history. They were hunters and gatherers running behind animals. And then we see individuals going beyond the confines of our planet, and they are somehow coming to a point of a divine human complex. Of course, this has problems to itself. That's all.
The alternative of capitalism is another debate. So when capitalism is one of the foundations of modernity, but this corrodes political modernity, and it's not controlled by it. And in a way, it is a law unto itself. In market economy, it should not be reduced to that. Otherwise, we will not be able to talk about a modernity. We're talking about this asymmetric relationship, and that corrodes democracy and makes it a mere vehicle. But democracy should be all about coexistence. It's a modern response to that question, whereas capitalism is about satisfying basic needs. And again, it's a modern response. And these are intertwined. And for economic modernity, the response for that does not correspond to the political response. These should be dealt with autonomously, construction of the political realm and economic realm. And of course, we cannot talk about entire autonomy. Of course, there will be entanglements, but for quite some time, economic modernity has been exerting dominance on the other. What constructs modernity? This is not a process that constructs modernity. As for the other question, of course, we need to improve competition, commodification, urbanization. This also makes possible a sense of solidarity. I do not disagree with that. I'm not saying that capitalism competition is to be shunned, but for capitalism to supersede democracy and the fact that capitalism is the dominant force is has upset the balance within modernity, and that's why rather than solidarity, um, freedom has gained priority. I'm not saying that we need to overlook liberties, but regarding the relationship between solidarity and freedom, here's what I would like to say. If freedom and liberty is seen above all, then solidarity comes in the second place, and this wreaks havoc within the social fabric, and that's my response to this question. Sorry to have taken too much of your time. There's one more question from Yahya, and you also talked about autonomy, and you labeled attacks on that as deviation with the impact of neoliberal policies. Individuals and corporations' autonomy is being eroded. Here's my question. Has modernity surrendered into capitalism? What do you think is the way out? Thank you. Well, I agree with Yahya in the sense that this, because of these deviations that we've been talking about, rather than a general modernity, we talk about the general capitalism, and this does not have a modernity. I wrote about this extensively in the past. A capitalism that doesn't have a modernity is what we are confined to. So demand for a new modernity will definitely come to the foreground. What sort of a modernity do we want to live in is the question here. And I think that's the question that we need to entertain. What sort of a modernity do we want to live in is the question that needs to be entertained, but I can't possibly answer this question now in a matter of minutes. One more question for you, sir. Changing the humankind. And you talked about the magnificent story of the humankind. We cannot say that all the implications are positive. In order to ensure this progress, human beings have inflicted a lot of damage on themselves and the environment as well. And this has also given way to cultural and economic hegemony. How would you assess the magnificent story of the humankind from here? Perhaps you talked about this during your speech, but this is the question that we received nonetheless. Let me reiterate that in this magnificent story of the humankind, I'm not talking about something that is positive, obviously, but I don't think there is any other way to express this. We're talking about a magnificent story of progress, but this has meant destruction for environment, inequality between societies, and also this inequality between haves and have-nots. And of course, all of these things are things that beset humanity at large, but by and large, this is progress. and we cannot define this in any other way. And we're not happy with the implications, socialization of nature, taming of nature, inflicting of damage on the environment. In 1991, Anthony Gibson wrote about this. The environment is now socialized. That is to say, the human element is always there, is always transforming the nature. That's why nature is no longer capable of renewing itself, for it to reconstruct itself. You need humans. Only humans can help nature build itself. Of course, this is contentious, but that is the case. This is the result of this progress, but that does not negate the magnificent story of the humankind. It doesn't make it less important, I believe. Thank you. Ergen Ekici asks another question. It seems as if all the questions are directed to me. Here's the question, sir. In positive sciences, what would you like to say about the relationship between positive science and social sciences, and prevent or refrain from reproducing the dominance of positive sciences? Scientific discourse has changed throughout history. Do you think it's a construct as well? Thank you. Now, I come across this question quite often, and for the last couple of years now, at our university, we have a school of medicine, and we get together with colleagues from there, and we discuss how medical issues and sociological issues can be dealt with together. For quite some time now, I have been interested in neurology and biology as well, and my view is that social sciences, that is to say sociology especially, to an important extent, has been seeing itself as the only power to explain the human condition, and sort of overlooks biology and neurology. I'm not saying this for everyone, but you know, this is something that we need to discuss. That being the case, regarding the basics of humanity, can you really provide an explanation? Can you really understand the human condition? I do not think that to be the case. And this is what I mean, but here's what I also want to say. Positivism was a phenomenon of the 19th century. Auguste Comte was the forefather of social sciences, but then afterwards it was dethroned. Right now, when we look at the family of sciences, we see that some of the debates have now become archaic. In the 19th century, positivism gathered pace, and for quite some time it has been defeated. What we're saying, social sciences should be rubbing shoulders with the positive sciences, that there should be a reconciliation between the two to understand the human condition, is not embracing positivism again. That's what I wanted to also underscore. Yes, one last question, sir. Hello. You talked about a pandemic society. I do not understand this question, says the chair. I do not think I said any such thing. What I meant was these days, probably. At the time of the pandemic, I didn't call it a pandemic society. The times that we are going through right now, coronavirus pandemic, has revealed the importance of solidarity. That's what I meant. Yes. And also, pandemic society is a different debate. I didn't say it that way. What we're going through right now requires solidarity. That's what I wanted to say. Okay, thank you. Hopefully I have been able to answer all the questions. Yes. There's a question for me. This is the one last one, I believe, says the chair. Turkish modernity has been criticized by different quarters. Do you see reflections of the postmodernist discourse mainly? Is the question. Yes, now all modernization processes have been criticized, I said during my remarks. And as Cemal also said, this is something that is based on the attitudes, but Turkish modernity compared to other modernity movements has dimensions that deserve criticism, but principles of the modernity movement, conceptualizations were given place in here. So in practice, there may have been some things that succeeded and some failed, but within this modernization, there might be some problems as well. And by using them as a pretext, we cannot negate modernity entirely. One more question. This is the last question, says the chair once again. Our time is up. Ibrahim, Professor, this question is for you. You said that modernity emancipates the human existence. Why did the existential philosophy, why was it needed? Modernism? What is the question? I do not understand it, says the speaker. As a society, from the point of view of philosophy for human existence, why did we need existential philosophy? That is the question. I do not understand how you came up with that deduction, but it has to be said that unfortunately there's a lot of confusion about these concepts. Modernism does not mean modernity. Modernism, rather than modernity, as we know, in the 19th century, it originated in the arts, and some people use this as an ideological distinction. So here, what I mean, modernity and progress, the relationship between the two and where we are today, and deviations that we are experiencing today, and the problematic implications of these deviations, that is what I'm focusing on. My debate was not about modernism. Thank you very much. Dear participants, thank you for your participation. We have come to the end of our session. We adjourn the session. Thank you and goodbye. Any final words? Please also unmute your mic. Nothing from my side. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. How about you, sir? Any final remarks? No, but thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you. The session is adjourned. Thank you for your participation, for your questions, and for your time. We hope to see you at the next session. Thank you and goodbye.